The September morning arrived with that peculiar quality of light that seemed to exist only on the first of the month, golden and hesitant, as though the sun itself wasn't quite sure whether summer had truly ended. At King's Cross Station, the usual Friday chaos of commuters and tourists swirled through the main concourse, none of them aware that between platforms 9 and 10, an entirely different sort of journey was beginning. Albus Severus Potter stood frozen before the barrier, his trolley feeling suddenly heavier than it had moments ago. The solid brick wall stared back at him, unyielding and ordinary, and for one terrible moment, he wondered if this had all been an elaborate joke, if magic itself had decided he wasn't ready after all. It doesn't get less strange, does it? His father's voice came from beside him, warm with understanding. Harry Potter looked down at his youngest son with that expression Albus had seen countless times, the one that said, "I know exactly what you're feeling." "Did you ever, your first time, were you—" Albus couldn't quite finish the question. Terrified, I'd bounce straight off and make a fool of myself in front of everyone. Harry's smile crinkled the corners of his eyes. Every single year, Al. Even now, I half expect it not to work. Ginny Potter appeared on Albus's other side, resting a hand on his shoulder. Her fingers were warm through his jacket. "Your brother went through like he owned the place naturally, couldn't wait to show off." "That's because James is a complete prat," Albus muttered, though without any real heat. "Accurate," Ginny agreed, and squeezed his shoulder. "Ready?" Albus looked at the barrier again. Somewhere beyond it, his brother was probably already holding court among his third-year friends, and Lily would be pestering their parents about when her turn would come for years yet. But this moment belonged to him, alone. He gripped the trolley handle tighter and walked forward. The sensation was like passing through a cool waterfall in summer, a brief touch of otherworldly cold, a moment of absolute darkness, and then light and sound crashed over him in a wave. Platform 9 3/4 sprawled before him in all its impossible glory. The Hogwarts Express stood magnificent and scarlet against the platform, steam billowing from its chimney in great white clouds that smelled of coal and magic and adventure. Families clustered in tight groups, some embracing, others engaged in last-minute instructions delivered in fierce whispers. Trunks scraped across the platform, owls hooted indignantly from their cages. Somewhere, a cat yowled in protest. "There he is," James's voice carried over the din. "Thought maybe you chickened out, Al." Albus's older brother appeared through the crowd, already in his Hogwarts robes, the red and gold of Gryffindor bright against his collar. He'd grown over the summer, Albus noted with some irritation. James seemed determined to shoot up to their father's height before Christmas. "Shut it, James," Albus replied, but without conviction. The sheer overwhelming presence of the train, the platform, the other students. It was too much to muster proper indignation. "James, go find your friends and leave your brother alone," Ginny said, though her tone held more amusement than reproach. "You'll have the entire train ride to torment him." "Not tormenting, Mum. Educating." James grinned, then leaned closer to Albus. "Slytherin's not so bad, you know. Hugo says their common room is actually pretty brilliant, under the lake and everything." "James." But their brother had already melted back into the crowd, leaving Albus with his stomach churning. "Slytherin." Of course, James would bring it up now, here, when there was no escape from thinking about it. Al. His father crouched down slightly, meeting his eyes directly. The sorting hat takes your choice into account. I promise you that. And whatever happens. I know, Albus interrupted, then felt guilty for it. Sorry, I know. Any house would be lucky to have me, and you'll be proud regardless. And it's what I do with my time there that matters, not which table I sit at. Harry's eyebrows rose. Have I really said it that many times? Yes, Albus and Ginny replied in unison. A commotion near the barrier drew their attention. A family had just come through. A woman with bushy brown hair pulled into a practical bun, a tall man with warm eyes, and 2 children. The girl had inherited her mother's hair, though it was a shade lighter, and she was already scanning the crowd with sharp, assessing eyes. The boy looked younger, gangly and excited. Rose, Ginny waved, and the other family changed direction toward them. Hermione Granger-Weasley smiled as she approached, though she looked slightly frazzled. I swear, every year I expect the barrier to vanish, and every year I'm relieved when it doesn't. Where's Ron? Harry asked. Parking, Hermione said, in a tone that suggested this had been a point of contention. He insisted we bring the car even though I told him. She stopped, took a breath, and smiled at Albus. Hello, Al. Ready for your big day? Rose had already moved to stand beside Albus, her chin lifted in that determined way she had. I've read all the course books twice, she announced, and several supplementary texts. Professor McGonagall still teaches Transfiguration. Did you know? She was Mum's head of house. Everyone knows that, Rose, came a new voice. Hugo Granger-Weasley had appeared, looking thoroughly unimpressed with his sister. You don't have to recite everything. I'm not reciting. I'm preparing. Revising. More like, that's not even the right use of children, Hermione said mildly, and both fell silent. She had that effect. Ron Weasley arrived then, slightly out of breath, and carrying what appeared to be several bags of sweets. Got them, he declared triumphantly. The good shop near the Chambermaid, car park, chocolate frogs, Bertie Bott's, pumpkin pasties, the lot. Ron, they have a trolley on the train. Not the same, Hermione. Trust me. Ron distributed the bags among his children with the solemnity of someone passing on sacred knowledge. First train ride deserves proper provisions. Rose accepted hers with a dignity that suggested she considered this beneath her, but wasn't foolish enough to refuse chocolate. Albus took his own bag gratefully. His mother had packed him snacks, of course, but there was something about sweets from Uncle Ron that felt like a lucky charm. The platform was growing more crowded now, the 11 o'clock departure looming closer. Parents clutched their children, some crying, others maintaining stiff upper lips. A group of older students laughed by one of the carriage doors, their easy confidence marking them as seventh years who'd seen all this before. Albus Potter? The voice was uncertain, slightly cold, and came from behind him. Albus turned to find a boy about his age standing alone, his trunk beside him. The boy had pale blonde hair slicked back carefully, and his grey eyes held something cautious in them, not quite fear, but a wariness that Albus recognized because he'd seen it in his own mirror that morning. Scorpius Malfoy, his father said quietly, and Albus felt the adults around him go still. The boy, Scorpius, straightened his shoulders. Sir, I thought, he faltered, then seemed to gather himself. I've read about you, about what you did. I wanted to say thank you. My father says—" He stopped again, and Albus saw his jaw clench. "Well, thank you." The silence stretched for a moment too long. Albus could feel history pressing down on the platform, all the things the adults remembered, and he couldn't, not really. He'd heard the stories, of course. Everyone had. But this boy standing before them looked nothing like the villain of those tales. He just looked nervous and alone. Harry stepped forward and extended his hand. "Your father's well." Scorpius blinked, clearly surprised, then shook the offered hand. "Yes, sir. Yes." "Good." Harry's voice held something complicated in it, but his expression was kind. "You'll be starting at Hogwarts this year, then?" "Yes, sir." "Scorpius, is it?" Ginny asked, her tone warmer than Albus had expected. "That's a rather distinguished name." A small, uncertain smile flickered across the boy's face. "My mother chose it. She liked the stars." "A fine choice," Hermione said, and Albus heard approval in her voice. Constellation names have a long tradition in pure-blood families. "Where are your parents?" Ron asked, looking around with what seemed like genuine concern rather than suspicion. "Father had business at Gringotts. Mother—" Scorpius's voice went quieter. "She's not well. She wanted to come, but—" "Well, you've found friends now," Ginny said decisively. And before Albus quite knew what was happening, his mother had drawn Scorpius into their little circle. "First years need to stick together. Rose, you'll keep an eye on both boys, won't you?" Rose looked at Scorpius with her mother's analytical expression, weighing and measuring. Then she stuck out her hand. "Rose, Granger-Weasley. I suppose we'll be in classes together." Scorpius shook her hand carefully. "I suppose so." "Right then." Ron clapped his hands together with forced cheer. "Should probably get you lot on the train before it leaves without you." The next few minutes dissolved into chaos. Trunks being loaded, last-minute reminders, kisses and hugs exchanged. Albus found himself wrapped in his mother's arms, breathing in her familiar scent of flowers and broom polish. "Be yourself," she whispered into his hair. "That's all that matters. Be brave, be kind, and write to us." "I will." His father's hug was briefer, but somehow heavier with meaning. "The name is a gift, not a burden," Harry said quietly, so only Albus could hear. "You'll make it your own." Then Lily was there, 11 months younger, but just as fierce, throwing her arms around his waist. "Don't forget about me when you're learning all the best spells." "Never," Albus promised, and found he meant it. Rose was receiving similar treatment from her parents, though Hermione seemed to be going through a mental checklist of reminders, while Ron just kept ruffling Hugo's hair. Scorpius stood slightly apart, watching these farewells, with something wistful in his expression. "Come on," Albus said, making a decision. He grabbed his trunk and nodded toward the train. "We should find a compartment." Rose looked at him, then at Scorpius, and something passed between them. An understanding, perhaps, or the beginning of one. "Together." "Why not?" Albus replied, with more confidence than he felt. They helped each other load the trunks, a process that involved much pushing and some creative levitation from a helpful 5th year who took pity on them. The corridor inside the train was narrow and already filling with students greeting friends, comparing summers, laughing at private jokes. "Toward the back," Rose suggested. "The prefects say the middle carriages get too crowded." They moved through the train, Rose leading with her usual determination, Albus in the middle, and Scorpius bringing up the rear. Through the windows, Albus could see his parents still on the platform, Ginny's arm around Lily, Harry watching the train with that far-away expression he sometimes got. "Here," Rose announced, finding an empty compartment. "This will do." They filed in and claimed their seats, Rose by the window facing forward, Albus across from her, Scorpius beside him. For a moment, they simply looked at each other, 3 11-year-olds who'd been thrown together by chance or fate or their parents' complicated histories. "So," Rose said, finally, breaking the silence, "which house do you think you'll be in?" It was the question on all their minds, the one that had probably kept each of them awake the night before. Albus found himself looking out the window, watching his parents one last time as the whistle blew and the train began to move. "I don't know," he admitted, "but I suppose we'll find out tonight." The Hogwarts Express pulled away from platform 9 3/4, carrying them toward a future none of them could predict, bearing the weight of their parents' legacies and their own hopes, fears, and possibilities. Behind them, on the platform, the previous generation watched and remembered their own first journeys. And ahead, beyond the Scottish Highlands and the darkening sky, Hogwarts waited. The train picked up speed, and King's Cross Station fell away behind them. Inside the compartment, 3 children sat in companionable uncertainty, sharing sweets from paper bags and stealing glances at each other, wondering if perhaps this strange beginning might become something like friendship. The whistle sounded again, a long, clear note that spoke of departure and arrival, of endings and beginnings, and the familiar magic of September 1st. The English countryside rolled past the compartment window in shades of green and gold, fields giving way to villages, villages to towns, towns back to fields, again in an endless pattern. Albus watched it all with his cheek pressed against the cool glass, hyper-aware of the 2 other people sharing his space. Rose, who had already pulled out a book titled Hogwarts, A History, Revised Edition, and Scorpius, who sat very still beside him as though afraid to take up too much room. The silence had stretched on for nearly 10 minutes now, comfortable for none of them, but too established to break easily. Outside, the train rattled over a bridge, and Albus caught a glimpse of a river below, silver in the late morning light. "My mother made me read that," Scorpius said suddenly, nodding toward Rose's book. "Twice." Rose looked up, her expression cautious but interested. "What did you think of it?" "The chapter on the founding was brilliant. The bit about Salazar Slytherin leaving." He stopped abruptly, as though remembering something. "Well, it was interesting." "You can say his name, you know," Rose said, her voice matter-of-fact. "Slytherin. It's just history." "Your mother probably has strong opinions about him," Scorpius replied, not quite looking at her. "She has strong opinions about everyone in history." Rose set the book down on her lap, marking her place with one finger. "But she taught me to judge people by their actions, not their house or their last name." The words hung in the air between them, heavy with meaning. Albus saw something flicker across Scorpius's face. Surprise, perhaps, or gratitude, or some mixture of both. That's a good way to think about things," Scorpius said quietly. The compartment door slid open with a bang, making all 3 of them jump. A witch pushing a trolley laden with sweets leaned in, her face cheerful, beneath a pointed hat. Anything from the trolley, dears? Oh. Rose immediately began digging in her bag. Yes, I'd like... Already got some, thanks to Uncle Ron. Albus interrupted, holding up his paper bag. But maybe... He hesitated, glancing at Scorpius, who was studying his hands with great concentration. I'll take some chocolate frogs, Rose decided, pulling out a handful of coins. And maybe some pumpkin pasties. Scorpius, do you want anything? I have money, Scorpius said quickly, reaching for his own bag. I know you do. I'm asking if you want anything. Rose's tone was patient, almost gentle, and Albus felt a rush of affection for his cousin. Pumpkin pasties are good, Albus offered. And Bertie Bott's, every flavor beans, if you're feeling brave. Every flavor? Scorpius asked, his eyebrows rising. Every flavor, Albus confirmed. James once got vomit. That's disgusting. That's Bertie Bott's. Scorpius made his purchases, pasties and a cauldron cake, but notably avoiding the Bertie Bott's, and the trolley witch moved on. Rose distributed the food with the efficiency of someone organizing a study group, and suddenly the compartment felt less like a space shared by wary strangers and more like something approaching companionship. Right then, Rose said, unwrapping a chocolate frog. We should probably get to know each other properly, since we'll be at school together. What do you want to know? Albus asked, around a mouthful of pumpkin pasty. The taste was perfect. Cinnamon and nutmeg and autumn condensed into pastry form. What you're good at, I suppose. What you're worried about. That sort of thing. Rose captured her chocolate frog before it could leap out the window and examined the card that came with it. Oh, I've got Dumbledore again. I have 6 of him already. I'll trade you, Scorpius offered. If I get someone you don't have. Deal. They ate in silence for a moment, the ice slowly melting. Outside, the landscape was changing. Fewer towns now, more open spaces, the land beginning to roll into hills. I'm worried about potions, Rose admitted suddenly. Mum says it's about precision and following instructions, which I can do, but Dad says you need instinct too, and I don't know if I have that. My dad says potions is about understanding why ingredients work together, Scorpius said, not just memorizing recipes. That makes sense. Rose pulled out a small notebook. Of course she had a notebook, and made a note. What about you, Al? What are you worried about? Albus considered lying, offering some safe concern about transfiguration or history of magic. But something about the compartment, about the way they were all trying so hard to be honest with each other, made him tell the truth. The sorting, he said quietly. Everyone expects me to be in Gryffindor, like my dad and both my parents, and basically everyone in my family except... He stopped. Except your cousin who married my dad? Scorpius finished. I know about her. Everyone knows about her. She's not like that anymore, Albus said, defensive. Aunt Astoria says people can change. My mother, Scorpius corrected gently. And yes, she does say that. Usually when she's trying to convince Father that the world isn't ending. He picked at the edge of his cauldron cake. I'm worried about the sorting too. Everyone expects me to be in Slytherin, my whole family, going back forever. What if you're not? Rose asked, her curiosity clearly overcoming her tact. Then I suppose I'll be the first Malfoy in history to break tradition. Scorpius tried to smile, but it didn't quite reach his eyes. Father says he'll be proud of me regardless, but I'm not sure he means it. Or maybe he does mean it, but won't actually feel it when it happens. My parents mean it, Albus said, but I'm still scared of disappointing them anyway. That's because you love them, Rose said, with the kind of simple wisdom that occasionally made her sound much older than 11. You wouldn't worry about disappointing them if you didn't care what they thought. The train rattled over another bridge, and this time Albus saw sheep in the fields below, white dots against green. They were getting further from London now, heading into territory he'd only seen on family trips, places where magic and mundane coexisted in ways that still felt novel to him. I want to be in Ravenclaw, Rose announced, as though daring them to argue. Everyone expects Gryffindor because of Mum and Dad, but I like learning things. I like knowing things. And Ravenclaw is about wisdom, not just cleverness. That's a good house, Scorpius offered. They're all good houses, Rose said firmly. That's what Mum says. They just value different things. She looked at both boys. What do you two want, if you could choose? Albus thought about it. Really thought about it. Not just the rehearsed answer he'd given his parents. I don't know, he admitted finally. Maybe Hufflepuff? They're loyal and kind, and no one expects anything from them except to be good people. That's not nothing, Rose said. I know. That's why it appeals to me. Scorpius had gone quiet again, his grey eyes distant. When he spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. I used to want Slytherin. It's what I was raised for. Ambition, cunning, knowing how to navigate difficult situations. But lately, I wonder if wanting something just because it's expected is a very Slytherin thing to do. Or not Slytherin at all. That's quite philosophical for 11, Rose observed. My mother reads philosophy. She says it helps with the illness, having something to think about that isn't just... He stopped, clearly uncomfortable. You don't have to explain, Albus said quickly. About your mum, I mean, if you don't want to. Thank you. The compartment door slid open again, and this time it was James who stuck his head in, his grin wide and mischievous. There you are, Al. Thought you might have fallen off the train. Go away, James. Can't. Parental orders to check on you. James looked at Rose, then at Scorpius, and his grin faltered slightly. You're sitting with Malfoy. Scorpius, Albus corrected, his voice firmer than he felt. His name is Scorpius. And yes, we're sitting together. James studied the three of them for a long moment, and Albus could see his brother processing this information, weighing it against whatever prejudices he'd inherited or absorbed. Then James shrugged. Fair enough. Uncle Ron will have kittens, but that's his problem. He focused on Scorpius. Your dad was a complete arse at school, you know. Made Harry's life hell. James, Albus protested. What? It's true. James leaned against the doorframe. But Harry says people change, and Mum says judging kids for their parents' mistakes is exactly the kind of thing that starts feuds in the first place. He nodded at Scorpius. So, fresh start, yeah? Scorpius blinked, clearly not expecting this. Yes, thank you. Don't thank me yet. If you're awful, I reserve the right to hex you. James grinned again, the momentary seriousness gone. Right, I'm off. Try not to do anything stupid before you even get to school, Al. That's your specialty, not mine, Albus called after him, and was rewarded with James's laughter echoing down the corridor. Rose had been watching this exchange with interest. Your brother's not what I expected. No one in my family is what anyone expects, Albus muttered. It's exhausting. Try being a Malfoy. Scorpius said, and there was dark humor in his voice. Everyone expects the worst, all the time. Then we'll just have to prove them wrong, Rose declared, as though it were the simplest thing in the world. She pulled out her chocolate frog cards and spread them on the seat. Right, let's see what we've got. They spent the next hour trading cards and debating the relative merits of various famous witches and wizards. Rose had strong opinions about nearly everyone. Scorpius contributed surprisingly detailed knowledge about historical pureblood families, and Albus mostly listened, grateful to be learning things his father had never thought to teach him. The landscape outside had changed dramatically. Rolling hills had given way to dramatic moors, and in the distance, Albus could see mountains rising purple against the sky. They were in Scotland now, or getting close, heading into territory that felt ancient and wild, even from the train window. Look at that, Rose breathed, pressing close to the glass. A castle stood on a distant hill. Not Hogwarts, too small for that, but impressive nonetheless, its grey stone towers reaching toward the clouds. Around it, the land seemed to shimmer slightly, and Albus wondered if it was protected by magic, hidden from Muggle eyes, but visible to anyone aboard this particular train. There are more wizarding families up here, Scorpius said, the further north you go. Something about the old magic being stronger in Scotland. Is that true, or just something purebloods say? Rose asked, but her tone was curious rather than accusatory. Bit of both, probably. Scorpius smiled slightly. Most things are. The afternoon wore on, marked by the changing light and the steady rhythm of the train. Other students passed their compartment, a group of fourth-year girls who giggled at something, a stern-looking prefect checking that everyone was behaving, a tiny first-year who looked lost until Rose called out directions to the loo. They talked about everything and nothing, about Quidditch, which Albus loved, Scorpius tolerated, and Rose found barbaric, about which subjects they were most excited for, charms, defense against the dark arts, and transfiguration respectively, about their younger siblings, and what it was like living with the pressure of older family members who'd done extraordinary things. The worst part, Rose said, pulling her robes out of her trunk as the sky outside began to darken, is that Mum genuinely doesn't understand why I'm nervous. She was brilliant at everything from day one. She doesn't know what it's like to be ordinary. You're not ordinary, Albus protested. You've already read half the library. Reading isn't the same as doing magic. What if I'm rubbish at it? What if I can barely make a feather float? Then we'll practice together until you can make it fly, Scorpius said simply. That's what friends do, isn't it? The word hung in the air. Friends. It felt presumptuous and brave and exactly right all at once. Is that what we are? Rose asked, but she was smiling. I'd like us to be, Scorpius said, his cheeks slightly pink. Me too, Albus agreed. Rose looked at both of them, her expression serious. Then she stuck out her hand, palm down, hovering over the space between the seats. Friends then. Properly. Whatever houses we end up in. Albus placed his hand over hers without hesitation. Scorpius looked at their joined hands for a moment, something vulnerable and hopeful in his face before adding his own. Friends, they said together, and it felt like a promise, like magic of a different sort than what they'd come to Hogwarts to learn. Outside, the sun was setting in earnest now, painting the Scottish Highlands in shades of orange and purple and deep blue. The train rushed through the growing darkness, its whistle sounding lonely and thrilling all at once. "We should change into our robes," Rose said, breaking the spell. "The prefect said we're less than an hour away." They took turns stepping into the corridor to change, modest and awkward as only 11-year-olds could be. When they were all back in the compartment, dressed in their plain black robes with no house colours yet to distinguish them, Albus felt both more and less himself, as though the robes were a costume he was trying on, but one that might become his skin given time. The mountains were closer now, dark shapes against the darkening sky. Stars had begun to appear, bright and cold, and impossibly numerous. "There," Scorpius said suddenly, pointing. "Is that—" But he didn't need to finish. They all saw it at once. A castle on a mountain, impossibly tall and sprawling, its windows glowing with warm light, its towers reaching toward the stars as though trying to touch them. Hogwarts. The train began to slow, and Albus felt his heart begin to race. This was it. The moment everything changed. The moment they stopped being children with famous parents and became students with their own stories to write. "Ready?" Rose whispered. Albus looked at his new friends, at Rose with her determination written in every line of her face, at Scorpius with his quiet courage and careful hope, and felt something settle in his chest. "Ready," he said, and meant it. The Hogwarts Express released one final, triumphant whistle as it pulled into Hogsmeade Station, and 3 first years pressed their faces to the window, watching their future draw closer with every passing second. The train shuddered to a halt with a final hiss of steam, and suddenly the corridor outside their compartment erupted with noise. Trunks were being hauled down, owls hooted in protest at being jostled, and older students called to each other with the easy familiarity of people returning home. Albus stood on uncertain legs. He'd been sitting so long the train's motion had become part of him, and reached for his trunk. "Leave them." A prefect's voice carried over the chaos. "First years leave your luggage. It'll be brought up to the castle separately." "Oh, thank goodness," Rose muttered, stepping back from her trunk. "I wasn't sure how we'd manage." They shuffled into the corridor, swept along by the press of bodies toward the exit. Albus caught a glimpse of James further ahead, laughing with his friends, completely at ease. The difference between second-year confidence and first-year terror had never seemed more vast. The platform at Hogsmeade Station was smaller than King's Cross, but somehow more magical, literally so. Lanterns floated in midair, casting pools of warm golden light across the crowd. The air smelled different here, cleaner and crisper, with undertones of pine and something else Albus couldn't quite identify. Magic, perhaps, though he wasn't sure magic had a smell. Furs years over here." The voice boomed across the platform, and Albus's heart leapt. He knew that voice from 100 family dinners, from birthday parties and Christmas visits. "Hagrid," he called out without thinking, and immediately felt dozens of eyes turned towards him. The gamekeeper stood head and shoulders above the crowd, his wild hair and beard catching the lantern light. His face split into an enormous grin when he spotted Albus. "There ye are, Harry's boy, and Rose too, if I'm not mistaken." His beetle-black eyes swept over them. "And who's this then?" "Scorpius Malfoy, sir," Scorpius said, his voice small but steady. Hagrid's expression flickered. Surprise, perhaps, or old memories surfacing, but his smile never faltered. "Well, nice to meet ye, Scorpius. Any friend at Albus and Rose is welcome. Right then." He raised his voice again. "Fur's years, follow me. Mind your step, it's a bit dark." They followed Hagrid down a steep, narrow path that seemed to vanish into complete darkness. Albus stayed close to Rose, who stayed close to Scorpius, the three of them forming a small knot of solidarity among the crowd of nervous first years. The path was barely wide enough for two people to walk abreast, and tree branches caught at their robes as they descended. "Where are we going?" someone whispered behind them. A girl with dark skin and worried eyes. "The lake," Rose answered, having clearly memorized this part. First years traditionally arrive by boat. "Why?" the girl asked. "Tradition," Rose said, as though this explained everything. Perhaps it did. The trees fell away suddenly, and Albus gasped. The black lake spread before them, vast and dark and utterly still. Its surface reflected the stars above so perfectly that for a dizzying moment, Albus couldn't tell where the water ended and the sky began. Small wooden boats bobbed gently at a dock, maybe 20 of them, each illuminated by a small lantern hanging from its prow. But none of that mattered, because there, across the water, rose Hogwarts. The castle was even more magnificent up close than it had seemed from the train. Impossibly tall towers reaching toward the stars, hundreds of windows glowing with warm light, the whole structure perched on a cliff as though it had grown there naturally, as much a part of the landscape as the mountains themselves. Albus had seen photographs, had heard stories his entire life, but nothing had prepared him for the reality of it. "Blimey," he breathed. "Language," Rose said automatically, but her voice was awed. "It's beautiful," Scorpius whispered, and there was something raw in his voice, something vulnerable. "I didn't think it would be this beautiful." "No more'n 4 to a boat," Hagrid called out, already settling himself into a boat that looked comically small beneath his bulk. "Come on now, don't be shy." Albus climbed into the nearest boat with Rose and Scorpius, and after a moment's hesitation, the worried-looking girl who'd asked about the lake joined them. "I'm Asher," she said. "Asher Patil. Is this safe?" "My cousin Padma went here," Rose said. "She said the boats are charmed. They've never sunk." "Never?" Asher asked hopefully. "Well, not in recorded history." That's not actually reassuring. The boats began to move of their own accord, gliding across the glassy surface of the lake without oars or engines or any visible means of propulsion. The motion was smooth and dreamlike, and Albus found himself leaning over the edge to peer into the dark water below. "Don't fall in," Rose warned. "The giant squid is supposed to be friendly, but I'd rather not test it." "There's a giant squid." Asher looked like she regretted asking. "And merpeople," Scorpius added, staring down into the depths. "My mother said they signed a treaty with Hogwarts centuries ago. They protect the castle from underwater threats." "What kind of underwater threats?" Asher's voice had gone up an octave. "Probably best not to think about it," Albus suggested. The flotilla of boats drifted toward the castle, and with each passing moment, Hogwarts seemed to grow larger, more imposing, more real. Albus could make out individual windows now, see the way the castle's foundation disappeared into the cliff face. Notice the shimmer of protective enchantments that must be layered over the whole structure. "Heads down," Hagrid called from the lead boat. They ducked instinctively, and the boat sailed through a curtain of ivy that concealed the entrance to an underground harbour. The sudden darkness was absolute, broken only by the lanterns on the boats, and the sound of water lapping against stone echoed strangely in the enclosed space. The boats bumped gently against an underground dock, and Hagrid was there to help them out, his enormous hands surprisingly gentle. "Watch your step now. Everyone got everything. No one left anything in the boats." They clambered onto the dock, a ragged group of 30-some first years, all trying to look brave and failing in various ways. Albus noticed a boy with red hair who must be another Weasley cousin, and a small girl who couldn't stop smiling despite looking terrified, and two boys who were clearly twins standing so close together they might have been joined. "This way." Hagrid led them through a tunnel carved into the rock itself. Their footsteps echoed, and someone behind Albus was breathing very quickly, close to hyperventilating. "It's all right," Rose said, turning to address the breather, a stocky boy with glasses. "We're almost there, just a bit further." The boy nodded gratefully, and Albus felt a surge of affection for his cousin. Trust Rose to notice someone else's panic even while managing her own nerves. The tunnel opened suddenly onto a flight of stone steps, and at the top, Albus's breath caught. Enormous oak doors stood before them, easily twice Hagrid's height, their dark wood carved with intricate patterns that seemed to shift in the lantern light. Old magic radiated from them, the kind of magic that had nothing to do with wands or spells, but everything to do with history and permanence and belonging. "Everyone here?" Hagrid did a quick count. "Right then. Wait here a moment while I announce you." He raised one massive fist and knocked 3 times, the sound echoing like thunder. The doors swung open, and a tall witch emerged, her dark hair pulled back severely, her robes immaculate. Albus recognized her from photos at his house, Professor McGonagall, though she'd been headmistress since before he was born. "The first years, Professor," Hagrid said with obvious pride. "Thank you, Hagrid." McGonagall's voice was crisp and Scottish, her expression stern but not unkind. Her eyes swept over the assembled students with the precision of someone cataloguing every detail. "Follow me, please, single file." She turned and walked through the doors, and they followed like ducklings, too awed to do anything else. The entrance hall was vast. There was no other word for it. The ceiling soared above them, lost in shadows. A magnificent marble staircase led to the upper floors, its banisters gleaming. Torches burned in brackets along the walls, and Albus could see doorways leading to other parts of the castle, each one beckoning with possibility. But McGonagall didn't lead them up the stairs or through any of the doorways. Instead, she guided them to a small chamber off to the side, empty except for the stone walls and the nervous first years crowding into it. "Welcome to Hogwarts," she said, and her voice softened slightly. "Shortly, you will pass through these doors." She gestured to a set of double doors that must lead to the Great Hall, "and join your classmates. But first, you must be sorted into your houses." Albus felt his stomach drop. "The 4 houses are Gryffindor, Hufflepuff, Ravenclaw, and Slytherin," McGonagall continued. "Each house has its own noble history and has produced outstanding witches and wizards. While you are at Hogwarts, your house will be like your family. Your triumphs will earn you points. Your rule-breaking will lose points. At the end of the year, the house with the most points wins the house cup. She paused, letting this sink in. The sorting ceremony will take place in front of the entire school. I suggest you smarten yourselves up as best you can. Her eyes lingered on a boy whose robes were askew and a girl with leaves in her hair from the tunnel. Wait here quietly. I will return when we are ready for you. She swept from the chamber, leaving them in trembling silence. For a moment, no one spoke. Then several people started talking at once. How do they sort us? Is it a test? My brother said we have to fight a troll. That's ridiculous. They wouldn't. What if I'm not brave enough for Gryffindor? What if I'm too clever for anywhere but Ravenclaw and I disappoint everyone? I heard Slytherin only takes pure bloods. That's not true, Scorpius said sharply, and several heads turned toward him. He lifted his chin. My father said they changed that after the war. Slytherin accepts anyone the Sorting Hat chooses. And how would your father know? Someone sneered. A boy with dark hair and a sneer that reminded Albus uncomfortably of the stories about Draco Malfoy at school. Because he was in Slytherin, Scorpius said evenly. And he spent the last 20 years trying to prove that house doesn't determine character. That's rich, coming from a Malfoy. That's enough, Rose interjected, her voice cutting through the rising tension. We're all nervous. Taking it out on each other won't help. The dark-haired boy looked like he wanted to argue, but something in Rose's expression made him think better of it. An uncomfortable silence settled over the chamber. Albus found himself studying his fellow first years properly for the first time. There were children of all kinds here, different heights, different backgrounds, different levels of terror written on their faces. The red-haired boy he'd noticed earlier was talking quietly to the twins. Asher had found another girl to stand with, both of them holding hands for comfort. A boy with very neat robes stood alone, his expression unreadable. It's the Sorting Hat, Albus said suddenly, and everyone looked at him. That's how they sort us. The hat reads your thoughts or qualities or something, and it chooses. How do you know? Someone asked. My dad told me, and my uncle, and my aunt, and basically everyone in my family who went here. Albus tried to smile. It's supposed to be quick. You just sit there, and it decides. What if it can't decide? The worried boy with glasses asked. What if you're not really anything? Then you're probably a Hufflepuff, someone joked, and several people laughed nervously. Hufflepuff isn't a default, Rose said firmly. It's for people who are loyal and fair and hard-working. Those are difficult things to be. My mum was a Hufflepuff, a girl said quietly. She's the bravest person I know. The chamber fell silent again, but this time it felt different, less hostile, more unified. They were all in this together, Albus realized, all equally terrified, all equally hopeful, all about to step into something that would define the next 7 years of their lives. Ghosts began drifting through the walls, and several first years yelped. A spectral figure in a ruff looked them over critically. New students? Oh, I do hope some of you are heading to Ravenclaw. We could use some fresh blood. Well, metaphorically speaking. He drifted away, chuckling at his own joke. Was that the Ravenclaw ghost, I think? Rose whispered. Mum told me about him. Another ghost appeared, this one with a noose around his nearly severed head. New blood, did someone say? How delightful. I'm nearly Headless Nick, Gryffindor house ghost. Any of you hoping for Gryffindor? Several hands went up hesitantly, including Albus's own. "Wonderful. I do hope to see you at our table." Nick gave them what might have been an encouraging smile, though it was difficult to tell with the way his head wobbled. "Don't be nervous about the sorting. The hat's been doing this for 1,000 years. It knows what it's doing." "That's not as comforting as you think it is," Asher muttered. The double doors burst open, and Professor McGonagall stood framed in the entrance, backlit by the golden glow of the great hall beyond. Albus could hear hundreds of voices beyond those doors, could smell food and candle wax and stone and magic. "We're ready for you now," McGonagall said. "Form a line and follow me." They scrambled into something resembling order, jostling for position. Albus found himself between Rose and Scorpius, drawing strength from their presence. His heart was hammering so hard, he was certain everyone could hear it. "Whatever happens," Rose whispered, "we're still friends." "Whatever happens," Scorpius agreed. "Whatever happens," Albus repeated, and took a deep breath. Professor McGonagall led them toward the doors, toward the light and sound, and the hundreds of students waiting to see who they would become. This was it, the moment that would define everything. Albus squared his shoulders, lifted his chin, and walked forward into his future. The great hall stole every thought from Albus's mind. He had heard about it, naturally. His father spoke of it with a particular warmth, his mother with fond exasperation at the memory of teenage drama played out beneath floating candles. But hearing about something and experiencing it were entirely different creatures, and the great hall demanded to be experienced. The ceiling soared impossibly high, enchanted to reflect the night sky outside. Stars wheeled overhead in their ancient patterns, and wispy clouds drifted past as though the roof had simply dissolved into the heavens themselves. Thousands of candles floated in midair, their flames steady and golden, casting dancing shadows across the 4 long house tables that stretched the length of the hall. Albus's eyes found the Gryffindor table first. He couldn't help it. The older students wore their red and gold with easy pride, and he spotted James immediately, sitting with his friends and grinning like an idiot. His brother caught his eye and gave an encouraging thumbs up that somehow made Albus feel both better and worse. The Ravenclaw table gleamed with blue and bronze, students sitting in small clusters that seemed to be engaged in intense discussions even now. Hufflepuff's black and yellow looked warm and welcoming, the students there seeming more relaxed than their counterparts, laughing easily, and Slytherin, green and silver, sitting with a particular kind of composure that might have been pride or might have been something more defensive. At the far end of the hall, on a raised platform, the teachers' table stretched across the width of the room. Professor McGonagall had taken her place there, in the center, the headmistress's throne-like chair, marking her authority. The other professors sat on either side. Albus recognized Professor Flitwick, tiny and ancient, and Professor Longbottom, who waved at him with barely contained excitement. But what commanded Albus's attention, what made his breath catch and his feet falter, was the stool sitting alone in front of the teacher's table. On it rested the sorting hat. It looked older than time itself, patched and frayed, stained and worn, one point flopping over like a wilted flower. It sat there innocuously, just a bit of cloth and magic. But Albus knew it held the power to determine everything. Professor McGonagall stood beside it, holding an ancient roll of parchment. The hall had fallen silent, hundreds of students watching the line of first years with expressions ranging from encouraging to bored to hungry. Dinner would come after the sorting, Albus remembered, and he felt a stab of sympathy for the students whose surnames fell late in the alphabet. "When I call your name," McGonagall announced, her voice carrying effortlessly through the hall, "you will come forward, sit on the stool, and place the hat on your head. The hat will then sort you into your house." She unrolled the parchment, and Albus felt his hands begin to shake. But before McGonagall could call the first name, the hat twitched. Then, to Albus's amazement, a rip near the brim opened like a mouth, and the hat began to sing. 1,000 years, or near enough, I've sorted young and old, seen brave hearts break and cowards bluff, watched shy ones become bold. In Gryffindor you'll find your place, if courage leads your way. Though bravery isn't just a face, you show the world each day. For Hufflepuff, the loyal and true, who work with steady hand, there's nothing that you cannot do. When friendship makes you stand, in Ravenclaw, where wisdom dwells and curiosity thrives, the mind's own magic weaves its spells, and learning shapes your lives. Or Slytherin, ambitious, keen, where cunning finds its home, you'll be the greatest ever seen, no matter where you roam. But hear me well, you young and new, these houses are not walls. The choice of who you'll grow into is yours when courage calls. I've seen the bravest Slytherin, the cleverest Hufflepuff, the loyal ones in Gryffindor, the kind in Ravenclaw. Enough. These traits live not in one alone, but scattered, mixed, combined. So when I place you in your home, remember, choice and chance entwined. The hat fell silent, and for a moment, the hall was absolutely still. Then applause broke out, polite and traditional, and the hat gave a small bow before settling back into immobility. "Right," McGonagall said, as though hat singing was the most natural thing in the world. Perhaps here it was. Abbott, Catherine. A small girl with blonde hair nearly tripped in her haste to reach the stool. The hat barely touched her head before shouting, "Hufflepuff!" and the yellow-clad table erupted in cheers. Catherine stumbled toward them, her face flushed with relief and joy. Abimbola Tunde. A tall boy with dark skin walked forward, with more composure than Albus could have managed. The hat deliberated for nearly a minute before announcing, "Ravenclaw." The blue and bronze table applauded warmly, and several students scooted aside to make room for him. The sorting continued, each name called ratcheting up Albus's anxiety another notch. Some sortings were instant, the hat barely settling before shouting its decision. Others took longer, the hat seeming to debate with itself, or perhaps with the student beneath. Imnite. Bones Edgar became a Hufflepuff, joining Catherine Abbott with evident delight. Bradshaw Mira took the full minute before being declared a Gryffindor, and James's table roared its approval. Albus tried to focus on the individual sortings, but his mind kept wandering, kept playing out scenarios. What if the hat couldn't decide? What if it put him in Slytherin and his father tried to hide his disappointment? What if it put him in Gryffindor and he spent 7 years failing to live up to the legacy? Caro Marcus. The hall went noticeably quieter at this name. Caro was another family with a dark history. But the boy who walked forward looked nothing like a Death Eater's descendant. He looked like a frightened 11-year-old. The hat took its time before declaring, "Hufflepuff." and the yellow table cheered, perhaps louder than they had for anyone else. A clear statement. We judge you on who you are, not who your family was. Beside Albus, Rose had gone very pale. Her turn was coming soon. Granger-Weasley would be in the G's. Scorpius stood on his other side, perfectly still, his face a mask of composure that Albus was beginning to recognize as terror under tight control. Finnegan, Declan, Gryffindor, Goldstein, Rebecca, Ravenclaw, Goyle, Harper. The hall went quiet again. Another infamous name, another child carrying weight that wasn't theirs to bear. A stocky girl with anxious eyes walked forward, and the hat barely touched her head before shouting, "Hufflepuff!" The yellow table had clearly decided to become the House of Redemption, welcoming her with the same fierce joy they'd shown Marcus Carrow. Granger-Weasley, Rose! Rose sucked in a sharp breath. She squeezed Albus's hand once, her fingers ice cold, and then walked forward with her head high, every inch her mother's daughter. The hall watched with undisguised interest. A Granger-Weasley sorting was news, clearly. Albus saw several older students leaning forward, and the teacher's table had gone alert. Professor Longbottom looked ready to burst with excitement. Rose sat on the stool with perfect posture, and McGonagall lowered the hat onto her head. It slipped down over her eyes, far too large, and Rose's hands gripped the edges of the stool. The hat sat there in silence. 1 second, 5, 10, 30 seconds passed, and whispers began to ripple through the hall. Rose remained perfectly still beneath the ancient artifact, her face hidden, her thoughts her own. A full minute. Albus's heart hammered. What was happening? What was the hat saying to her? Finally, the rip near the brim opened and shouted, "Ravenclaw!" The blue and bronze table exploded with cheers, but not before Albus heard a smattering of surprised muttering from the Gryffindor table. Rose removed the hat with shaking hands and walked toward her new house, where students were already making space for her, welcoming her with enthusiasm and curiosity in equal measure. She caught Albus's eye as she sat, and he saw relief there, and something else. Pride, perhaps, or vindication. She'd been sorted for herself, not for her parents' legacy. The sorting continued. Jameson, Alex, became a Slytherin. Jordan, Faith, undoubtedly related to Lee Jordan of his father's year, became a Gryffindor amid much cheering from the red and gold table. Kirk, Simon, Gryffindor. Lennox, Ivy, Slytherin. Lovegood, Luna. No, wait. McGonagall corrected herself with a slight smile. Apologies. Lovegood, Lysander. A dreamy-looking boy with dirty blonde hair walked forward, as though he were floating. The hat had barely settled before calling out, "Ravenclaw," and several students at that table smiled knowingly, clearly having expected nothing else. Malfoy, Scorpius. The hall didn't go quiet this time. It went silent, the kind of silence that felt heavy, that pressed down on everyone present. Albus saw his brother sit up straighter, saw the Slytherin table go very still, saw the headmistress's expression sharpen with interest. Scorpius walked forward with his head high, but Albus could see the tension in his shoulders, could see how tightly his hands were clenched at his sides. This was the moment Scorpius had been dreading, the moment when history and expectation would collide with whatever the hat saw in him. He sat on the stool. McGonagall placed the hat on his head, and the hat sat there and sat there. The seconds stretched into minutes. The whispers started almost immediately, speculation, judgment, old prejudices rising to the surface. Albus found himself holding his breath, silently pleading with a magical hat to be kind to his friend. 2 minutes passed. 3. Scorpius's knuckles were white against the wooden stool. The hat seemed to be having an intense debate, shifting and twitching on his head. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the hat opened its brim and called out, "Slytherin!" The green and silver table applauded, but it was measured, cautious, as though they weren't quite sure what to make of this development. Scorpius walked toward them with his head still high and took a seat near the end of the table. Some students welcomed him, others watched him warily. Albus saw an older student, probably a prefect, lean over to speak to Scorpius kindly and felt a fraction of his worry ease. The sorting continued, but Albus barely registered the names. His own was coming, lurking in the peas, waiting to reshape his entire existence. Not Cordelia. Slytherin. O'Brien. Seamus. Gryffindor. Parkinson. Damien. Another infamous name. Slytherin. The hall barely reacted anymore. Everyone was growing tired and hungry. Patil. Asher. The worried girl from their boat walked forward, and Albus found himself rooting for her. The hat took only moments before declaring, "Gryffindor," and she practically ran toward the red and gold table, her face alight with relief. Phillips, Charlotte, Hufflepuff, Potter, Albus. The hall went silent again, different from before. This was anticipation rather than judgment, curiosity rather than suspicion. But it felt just as heavy, just as crushing. Albus's feet moved without his conscious input, carrying him toward the stool that had determined so many fates already. He was hyper-aware of everything. The coolness of the stone floor beneath his feet, the weight of hundreds of eyes on him, the way his father's house was leaning forward slightly, expecting him to join them. He sat. The stool was still warm from the last student. Professor McGonagall lifted the hat, and for just a moment before she placed it on his head, Albus met her eyes. She gave him the smallest nod, so slight he might have imagined it, but it said, "You'll be fine." Then the hat descended over his eyes, and the great hall vanished into darkness. "Ah," said a small voice in his ear, dry and ancient and amused. "Another Potter. How delightful." Albus's thoughts raced. Please just decide quickly. Please don't make me sit here forever while everyone watches and judges and—" "Calm yourself, young man," the hat said. "Anxiety does not help my deliberation. Now, let's see what we have here." Albus felt something brushing through his mind. Not invasive, more like gentle fingers sorting through a library, looking for the right book. "Interesting," the hat murmured. "Very interesting indeed. You have your father's courage, no doubt about that, but it's a quieter courage than his. Less instinctive, more considered. You think before you act. That's wisdom, not cowardice, though you seem to fear it is. Am I brave enough for Gryffindor?" Albus thought desperately. "Brave enough? My dear boy, you're sitting here terrified, and you still walked forward. That's the very definition of bravery." The hat chuckled. "But there's more to you than courage. You have your mother's loyalty, fierce and absolute. You die for those you love. Yes, I see that clearly. Hufflepuff would make much of that." Please not Slytherin, Albus thought, then immediately felt guilty. Scorpius was in Slytherin. Scorpius was good. "Ah, but that's precisely why Slytherin would suit you," the hat said thoughtfully. "You understand that houses don't determine character. You made friends with a Malfoy when others would have shunned him. That's the kind of cunning we value, seeing beyond appearances, understanding that alliances matter more than old prejudices. You could be great in Slytherin, truly great. Albus's heart was pounding so hard he thought it might explode. But, the Hat continued, you don't want it, do you? And choice matters, young Potter. Your father taught me that. Choice is perhaps the most powerful magic of all. Where do I belong? Albus asked silently, and realized it was the most honest question he had. Ah, the Hat said softly. Now that is the right question. Where do you belong? Not where others think you should go, not where your name would suggest, but where will you flourish? Where will you find your people, your purpose, your path? The Hat paused, and Albus could almost feel it smiling. You belong, it said, where your courage and your loyalty combine, where your desire to prove yourself meets your need for family, where your father's legacy becomes a source of strength rather than pressure. The Hat's voice rose, addressing the hall once more. Gryffindor. The Hat lifted from Albus's head, and sound crashed over him like a wave. The Gryffindor table had erupted, not just in applause, but in genuine, roaring celebration. Students were on their feet, some banging their goblets against the table, others whistling and cheering. James was practically climbing over people to get closer, his face split in an enormous grin. Yes, his brother shouted over the din. That's my brother. Albus stumbled toward the red and gold table, his legs unsteady, his heart still racing. Hands reached out to pat his back, to shake his hand, to welcome him home. Someone, a prefect with kind eyes and a head girl badge, guided him to a seat near the middle of the table. Brilliant, she said warmly. I'm Mara Patel. Welcome to Gryffindor. Albus nodded mutely, still processing. He was a Gryffindor. Like his father, like his grandmother and grandfather, like all the Weasleys and Potters stretching back through the years. The Hat had put him where everyone expected, but somehow it didn't feel like capitulation. It felt like coming home. He looked toward the Ravenclaw table and caught Rose's eye. She was applauding politely, and when she saw him looking, she grinned and gave him a thumbs up. Then she mouthed something that looked like, told you so, because, of course, she had somehow known all along. The Slytherin table was harder to read. Scorpius sat near the end, clapping along with his housemates, and when Albus found him in the crowd, Scorpius smiled, a real smile, warm and genuine and relieved. They'd all been sorted, they'd all found their places, and they were still friends, just as they'd promised. The sorting continued, pulling Albus's attention back to the stool. Pre-wed. Morgan. A girl with wild red curls walked forward. Another Weasley connection, Albus realized, remembering that his grandmother had lost brothers with that surname. The Hat barely touched her head before shouting, Gryffindor! And she joined their table to thunderous applause, immediately swept up in conversation about the family tree. Ridley! Thomas! Hufflepuff! Scamander! Lorcan! The twin of Lysander Lovegood walked forward with the same dreamy expression his brother had worn. Ravenclaw! The Hat declared, and the blue and bronze table laughed with delight as the twins were reunited. Shacklebolt! Arya! A girl with dark skin and natural hair styled in intricate braids, walked forward with confidence. She was the goddaughter of the former Minister of Magic, Albus remembered hearing. The Hat took its time with her, nearly 2 minutes passing before declaring, Gryffindor. She joined their table to enthusiastic welcomes, sliding into a seat near Albus with a friendly nod. Sing, Priya. Ravenclaw. Smith, Oliver. Hufflepuff. Spinnet, Tobias. Gryffindor. The boy joined their table with a whoop of joy, and an older student pulled him into a headlock, laughing. Another Spinnet. Your Aunt Katie will be thrilled. Thomas, Aidan. Slytherin. Turpin, Eloise. Ravenclaw. Vance, Clara. Hufflepuff. Weasley, Dominique. Albus perked up. Another cousin, this one from Aunt Fleur and Uncle Bill's family. Dominique walked forward with Vila Grace, her silvery blonde hair catching the candlelight. The hat took only seconds before shouting, "Ravenclaw!" and Rose visibly brightened at having family at her table. Weasley, Hugo. Uncle Ron's younger son walked forward, his ears already bright red from nerves. The entire Weasley family seemed to hold its breath. Hugo was the last of this generation to be sorted, the final piece of the puzzle. The hat sat on his head for nearly a minute before calling out, "Hufflepuff." The yellow and black table erupted with particular enthusiasm, and Albus saw Uncle Ron leap to his feet at the teacher's table. Professor Longbottom had to physically restrain him from running down to hug his son. Hugo made his way to his new house with a mixture of relief and pride, immediately welcomed by the students who had sorted before him. Wood Ethan. Gryffindor. Another legacy student. Oliver Wood had been his father's Quidditch captain. The boy looked like he might cry with joy as he joined their table. Sabini, Serena. The last student walked forward, a tall girl with dark hair and perfect posture. Slytherin, the hat declared, and she joined the green and silver table with elegant composure. Professor McGonagall rolled up her parchment, and the sorting hat was carried away. The hall settled into expectant silence as the headmistress stood, her presence commanding attention without effort. "Welcome," she said, her voice carrying to every corner of the hall, "to another year at Hogwarts. To our new students, welcome to your new home. To our returning students, welcome back. Before we begin our feast, I have a few notices." She paused, her expression stern. The Forbidden Forest remains, as its name suggests, forbidden to all students. Mr. Filch, our caretaker, has asked me to remind you that magic in the corridors is prohibited, and that the list of banned items now includes Weasley's Wizard Wheez's entire inventory. Yes, Mr. Weasley, that includes you. James grinned unrepentantly at being singled out. Quidditch trials will be held in the second week of term. Anyone interested in playing for their house team should contact Madam Hooch. And finally, McGonagall's expression softened slightly. I want to remind all of you that Hogwarts is a place of learning, yes, but more importantly, it is a community. You will spend 7 years here, living alongside people from different backgrounds, different beliefs, different houses. I expect you to treat each other with respect and kindness, regardless of the colors you wear. Her eyes swept across the hall, lingering perhaps a moment longer on the Slytherin table. The war ended 27 years ago, she continued quietly. Many of you are children or grandchildren of those who fought in it. But you are not responsible for your parents' choices, good or ill. You are responsible only for your own. Make wise ones. The hall was absolutely silent, the weight of her words settling over them like snow. Then McGonagall smiled, a rare, genuine smile that transformed her stern features. Now, let us eat. She clapped her hands once, and the golden plates before them filled with food. Albus gasped. He'd seen magic his entire life, had grown up with floating dishes and self-stirring spoons and garden gnomes that had to be thrown over the fence. But this was something else entirely. The plates overflowed with every kind of food imaginable. Roast beef and roast chicken and roast pork, each perfectly cooked and glistening. Boiled potatoes and roast potatoes and mashed potatoes with gravy. Yorkshire puddings and peas and carrots and parsnips. Boats of gravy and cranberry sauce. Pumpkin pasties and treacle tart and chocolate eclairs and apple pie. Jugs of pumpkin juice and butterbeer and water appeared at intervals down the table. Blimey, Albus breathed. First feast? Mara Patel asked, already loading her plate with enthusiasm. It's always the best. House elves outdid themselves this year. House elves made all this, Albus asked, thinking of his Aunt Hermione's feelings on the matter. Don't start, James groaned from across the table. We get enough of that at home. Just eat and be grateful. Albus filled his plate, suddenly ravenous. He hadn't eaten since the pumpkin pasties on the train, and that felt like a lifetime ago. The food was extraordinary, better than any feast at home, better than any restaurant they'd visited. There was magic in it somehow, beyond the obvious enchantments that kept it hot and fresh. Around him, conversations bloomed like flowers. The older students peppered the first years with questions about the sorting, about where they were from, about whether they played Quidditch or preferred gobstones. The first years, in turn, asked about classes and professors and whether the staircases really did move. They do, Tobias Spinnet said, through a mouthful of roast beef. My aunt warned me. Says you have to leave extra time to get anywhere because you never know where the stairs will take you. I heard about a student who got stuck on one for 3 hours, Morgan Prewitt added, had to miss dinner entirely. That's an urban legend, Mara interjected. The stairs are unpredictable, yes, but they're not malicious. Usually, Ethan Wood looked alarmed. Well, sometimes they get playful, especially on Fridays. Albus listened to the chatter, feeling himself slowly relaxing into the rhythm of it. This was Gryffindor, loud and warm and chaotic, everyone talking over each other, but somehow still making themselves heard. He glanced over at the Ravenclaw table, where conversations seemed more focused, students leaning in to discuss something intently, then at Hufflepuff, where Hugo was already laughing with his new housemates, looking perfectly at ease. And finally at Slytherin, where Scorpius sat quietly, listening more than speaking, but not looking uncomfortable exactly, just watchful. Your friend ended up in Slytherin, James said, following Albus's gaze. The Malfoy kid. His name is Scorpius, Albus corrected automatically. Right, Scorpius. James reached for more Yorkshire pudding. You really friends with him? Yes. Dad will be fine with it, you know. He's not like some of the others. James jerked his head toward a cluster of older Gryffindors who were shooting suspicious glances toward the Slytherin table. Some people are still fighting the war in their heads. Dad's not one of them. I know. Good. James grinned. Besides, Slytherins are useful to know. They always know the best shortcuts and where to get contraband sweets. Is that all you think about? Breaking rules? I'm a Gryffindor. It's basically in the job description. Further down the table, Asha Patel was deep in conversation with Arya Shacklebolt, about their families. Your dad was Minister of Magic? Asha asked, awed. Godfather, Arya corrected. My actual dad works in the Department of International Magical Cooperation. Much less exciting. Still, knowing the former minister doesn't actually help with homework, Arya said dryly. Trust me, I asked. Across from them, Ethan Wood was explaining Quidditch strategy to anyone who would listen. My dad says the key is communication. The seeker gets all the glory, but it's the chasers who set up the plays. The feast continued, courses appearing and disappearing as plates were cleared. The desserts alone were worth the entire journey. Treacle tart and chocolate eclairs and ice cream in every flavor imaginable, and something called butterbeer pudding that made Albus's eyes roll back in his head. Good, isn't it? Mara laughed at his expression. Wait until you try the Christmas feast. They really go all out then. This isn't all out, Albus managed around another spoonful. This is Tuesday for Hogwarts. As the feast wound down, the noise level in the hall had risen to something approaching cacophony. 400 students, all talking and laughing and getting reacquainted after the summer, created a sound that was almost overwhelming. But underneath it, Albus could hear something else, a hum almost, like the castle itself was content. Professor McGonagall stood again, and gradually the noise subsided. Now that we are all fed and watered, she said, I have just a few more announcements. First years should note that the library is available for studying during the day, but closes at 8 o'clock. Madam Pince takes a dim view of students who abuse the privilege of library access. She continued with various logistical details. When classes started, where to find their schedules, how the password system worked for common rooms. Albus tried to pay attention, but found his mind drifting, exhaustion finally catching up with him. And now, McGonagall concluded, it is time to bid you good night. Prefects, please lead the first years to their dormitories. Everyone else, off to bed. We have a long year ahead of us. The hall erupted in the scraping of benches and the shuffling of feet. Mara stood and raised her voice. First-year Gryffindors, over here, please. Albus followed with the rest of his new housemates. All told, there were 12 of them. 12 new Gryffindors, 12 new threads in a tapestry that stretched back 1,000 years. As they filed out of the great hall, Albus looked back one more time. The Slytherin first years were gathering around their own prefect, and he caught Scorpius's eye across the crowd. His friends smiled and gave a small wave. Tomorrow, they would be students together, learning magic and making mistakes and figuring out who they were meant to become. Tonight, they were just tired 11-year-olds ready for bed. But first, Albus had to find his way to Gryffindor Tower. The marble staircase beckoned, leading up into the castle's mysterious depths, and Mara was already climbing, gesturing for them to follow. Keep up, she called, and try to remember the route. The castle doesn't make it easy, but you'll get the hang of it eventually. Eventually? Morgan Prowett asked nervously. Give it a week, maybe 2, possibly 3 for the really direction-challenged ones. Mara grinned over her shoulder. Don't worry, we've never actually lost anyone permanently. That's not as reassuring as you think it is, Ethan muttered, and several first years laughed nervously. They climbed the staircase and entered the castle proper, and Albus felt his exhaustion warring with wonder. Every corridor held something new, a portrait, a suit of armor, a tapestry depicting some ancient battle. The castle was alive with magic and history, and he was part of it now. Part of something bigger than himself, bigger than his name, bigger than anyone's expectations. A Gryffindor. The thought settled in his chest like a small warm coal, and he smiled despite his tiredness. This was home now. This was where his story would unfold. And tomorrow, it would truly begin. The conversations at the Gryffindor table had evolved from nervous first-day chatter into something warmer, more genuine. Albus found himself relaxing into his seat, the initial terror of the sorting fading into something like contentment. Around him, his new housemates were discovering each other through food and laughter. "Pass the roast potatoes," Arya Shacklebolt asked, and 3 people immediately reached for different dishes, resulting in a minor collision that sent a Yorkshire pudding rolling across the table. Everyone dissolved into laughter. "Smooth," James called from further down. "Very dignified, first years," says the person who spilled pumpkin juice on Professor Flitwick last year. Mara Patel shot back, and James had the grace to look embarrassed, while his friends howled with laughter. Albus speared another piece of roast chicken, marveling at how the flavors seemed to intensify with each bite. There was something almost magical about the food itself, beyond the obvious enchantments keeping everything at perfect temperature. It tasted like comfort, like celebration, like home. "My mum tried to make a feast like this once," Tobias Spinett said, reaching for the gravy boat. "For my 10th birthday. It was, well, let's just say the house elves here have a gift." "Your mum's Katie Spinett, right?" Arya asked. "The chaser." "That's her. She still goes on about the Quidditch matches here. Says nothing since has quite compared." Tobias grinned. "I'm hoping to try out for the team, continuing the family tradition and all that." "Lot of that going around," Morgan Prewett observed, glancing at Albus. "Family traditions, I mean. Must be strange, having everyone know your parents." Albus paused mid-bite. It was strange, he wanted to say. It was exhausting and wonderful and terrifying all at once. But before he could formulate a response, Asha Patel spoke up. "At least your parents are famous for good things," she said quietly. "My cousin Parvati, Mum's sister, she was here during the war. She fought in the Battle of Hogwarts. Her twin sister Padma too. They're heroes, proper ones. And here I am, worried I won't even be able to levitate a feather properly." "You'll be brilliant," Arya said firmly. "And if you're not brilliant immediately, you'll practice until you are. That's what Hogwarts is for." "Easy for you to say. Your godfather ran the ministry and spent most of his time terrified he'd make the wrong decision." Arya's voice was gentle but firm. "Uncle Kingsley told me once that courage isn't about not being afraid. It's about doing the right thing even when you are afraid. He said he was scared every single day he was minister." The table fell quiet for a moment, digesting this along with their food. "That's actually quite profound," Ethan Wood said finally. "Did you just quote the former Minister of Magic at us?" "I did, and it worked. So you're all going to have to deal with being inspired." Arya grinned and reached for the treacle tart that had appeared in front of her. The desserts had indeed arrived, and they were spectacular. Albus had thought the main courses were impressive, but the sweets put everything else to shame. Mountains of chocolate eclairs, forests of treacle tart, rivers of custard, lakes of ice cream in flavors he'd never imagined. Butterbeer, pumpkin pasty, even chocolate frog. "Oh, this is heaven," Morgan moaned around a mouthful of something that appeared to be solid chocolate with cherries suspended inside. "Pure heaven." "Try the butterbeer pudding," Albus recommended, pushing the dish toward her. "It's incredible." "Everything's incredible," Tobias agreed. "How are we supposed to concentrate on classes when we know this is waiting for us at every meal?" "You get used to it," a fifth-year student leaned over to tell them. "By third year, you barely notice the enchanted ceiling, or the floating candles, or the fact that dessert spontaneously generates. It's just Tuesday." "That's the saddest thing I've ever heard," Morgan declared. "Promise me we'll never stop being amazed by magic food." "I promise," Albus said solemnly, and they shook on it, which was complicated by the fact that both their hands were covered in chocolate. Down the table, James was holding court with his friends, recounting some story that involved a lot of hand gestures and resulted in his entire group nearly falling off the bench with laughter. Albus caught his brother's eye, and James winked at him, a small gesture of solidarity that meant more than it probably should. Across the hall, Albus could see Rose at the Ravenclaw table, deep in conversation with Dominique Weasley and the Scamander twins. Even from a distance, he could tell she was in her element, surrounded by people who valued knowledge and curiosity as much as she did. She caught him looking and mouthed, "This is amazing," her face alight with joy. The Hufflepuff table was perhaps the loudest of all, their cheers and laughter echoing off the enchanted ceiling. Hugo sat among them, looking slightly overwhelmed but happy, already being pulled into what appeared to be a passionate debate about the best Quidditch team in Britain. The Hufflepuffs had a reputation for being gentle and kind, but they were fierce in their loyalty to each other and to their opinions, apparently. And at the Slytherin table, Albus's gaze found Scorpius almost automatically. His friends sat with a small group of first years, listening more than speaking, but not isolated. An older student, a prefect, judging by the badge, seemed to be making a point of including all the first years in the conversation. Scorpius laughed at something someone said, and Albus felt relief wash over him. It was going to be all right. They were all going to be all right. "Earth to Albus," Arya said, waving a hand in front of his face. "You've been staring at that eclair for a solid minute. Are you going to eat it or propose to it?" "Sorry," Albus said, shaking himself. "Just thinking." "Dangerous activity, that," Mara Patil said from nearby, but her tone was kind. "Especially on your first night. There'll be plenty of time for thinking later. Tonight's for celebrating." "Celebrating what exactly?" Ethan asked. "Being here. Being sorted. Being part of something that's lasted 1,000 years." Mara gestured around the great hall, at the floating candles, at the 4 house tables filled with students, at the teachers' table where professors were chatting among themselves. "My sister told me that the first feast is special. It's when you stop being whoever you were before and start becoming who you'll be when you leave. It's a beginning." "That's quite poetic for someone who just downed 3 servings of roast beef," Morgan observed. "I contain multitudes," Mara replied with dignity. "Also, the roast beef here is exceptional. You'll learn to appreciate these things." The noise level in the hall had reached new heights as students finished their meals and lingered over dessert, reluctant to let the evening end. Ghosts drifted between the tables. Nearly headless, Nick stopped by Gryffindor, to welcome the first years officially, though his greeting was interrupted by his head lolling sideways at an alarming angle, which made several students squeal. Sorry, Nick said, adjusting his head. Always happens when I get excited. 45 times they swung the axe, 45. Left just enough skin to keep it attached, which has been nothing but trouble for 500 years. That's quite a story, Asher managed weakly. Oh, you should hear the full version sometime. I've got all evening to tell it. Well, all eternity, really. But who's counting? Nick drifted off, humming to himself, leaving the first years looking mildly traumatized. The ghost takes some getting used to, Mara assured them, but Nick's harmless, unlike Peeves. Who's Peeves? Albus asked, though he had a feeling he didn't want to know. A poltergeist. Think of the most annoying little brother imaginable. Give him supernatural powers and a mean streak, and you've got Peeves. He's been terrorizing Hogwarts for centuries. The teachers can't control him. Only the bloody Baron can really scare him, and even that doesn't always work. The bloody Baron. Tobias looked intrigued despite himself. Slytherin's ghost. Terrifying. Covered in chains and bloodstains, never speaks. He's got quite the tragic backstory, actually. Mara lowered her voice. He was in love with the Grey Lady, Ravenclaw's ghost, back when they were alive. When she rejected him, well, let's just say it didn't end well for either of them. That's horrible, Morgan whispered. It's history, Mara replied with a shrug. Hogwarts is full of it. Tragic romances, terrible betrayals, moments of incredible courage, spectacular failures. 1,000 years of people living and learning and making mistakes. We're just the latest chapter. Albus looked around the great hall again with new eyes. Every stone had witnessed something. Every portrait had seen generations of students pass through. The very walls held memories of people long dead, their hopes and fears and dreams absorbed into the castle's foundations. At the teacher's table, Professor Longbottom caught Albus's eye and gave him an enthusiastic thumbs up. His former professor looked absurdly happy, probably thrilled to have another Potter and another Weasley at Hogwarts. Beside him, Professor McGonagall was engaged in what appeared to be a serious discussion with a witch Albus didn't recognize, while Professor Flitwick stood on his specially designed chair to reach his goblet. That's Professor Abara, Mara said, following Albus's gaze. She teaches defense against the dark arts. Started 2 years ago. She's brilliant but strict, expects everyone to actually practice the spells rather than just reading about them. What happened to the old defense professor? Arya asked. Retired. The position used to be cursed back in the day. No one could hold it for more than a year. Your dad broke that curse, actually, Mara said to Albus. Defeating Voldemort broke a lot of curses. The casual mention of Voldemort, actually using the name rather than whispering you-know-who, made several first years flinch. Mara noticed and sighed. You're going to have to get used to hearing the name, she said gently. Voldemort's been gone for 27 years. He's history now, not a current threat. Professor McGonagall is very clear about that. Fear of a name only increases fear of the thing itself, she always says. That's what Hermione Granger-Weasley says too. Rose's voice came from behind them. She'd left the Ravenclaw table and come over to visit, Dominique trailing behind her. Mum says that refusing to use his name gives him power even in death. Your mum's usually right about things, Mara acknowledged. How's Ravenclaw treating you? Wonderfully. They're all so interesting. One of my housemates has already started a debate about whether transfiguration is more theoretical physics or applied metaphysics. Rose's eyes sparkled with delight. It's going to be brilliant. Only you would find that exciting, Dominique said with obvious affection. I'm just glad we're in the same house. Having family around her makes it less scary. How many Weasleys are at Hogwarts now? Tobias asked, looking between Rose, Dominique, and the various red-haired students scattered across the tables. Let's see. Rose started counting on her fingers. There's James in Gryffindor 3rd year, Molly Weasley in Ravenclaw 6th year. That's Uncle Percy's daughter. Roxanne in Gryffindor 5th year from Uncle George. Victoire graduated 2 years ago. Dominique and I are first years. Hugo's first year in Hufflepuff. Louis is 3rd year Gryffindor. That's Dominique's brother. Fred Weasley, the second, is 6th year Gryffindor, also Uncle George's kid. And Lucy Weasley is 4th year Hufflepuff. She's Uncle Percy's youngest. So, 10. 10 active Weasleys currently at Hogwarts. Merlin's beard, Ethan breathed. That's practically an army. It feels like one during family dinners, Rose said dryly. You can't imagine the noise. Actually, I'm starting to get a sense of it, Arya said, looking around the increasingly chaotic hall. Does it always get this loud? Wait until breakfast, Mara advised. Everyone's tired and grumpy and desperately needs coffee. That's when the real chaos starts. The enchanted ceiling above them had darkened further, the clouds drifting past in peaceful silence, while stars wheeled in their ancient patterns. Albus found himself staring up at it, trying to figure out the magic that would make stone and timber appear as endless sky. It's charmed to reflect the sky outside, Rose explained, following his gaze. But it's not just an illusion. Professor Flitwick told me it actually responds to astronomical events. When there's a meteor shower or an eclipse, you can watch it happen from inside the castle. That's incredible, Albus murmured. That's Hogwarts, Mara corrected. Everything here is incredible. You'll see. At the Slytherin table, the first years were beginning to look drowsy, several of them propping their heads on their hands. Scorpius had that glazed expression of someone fighting sleep with limited success. The Hufflepuffs looked similarly exhausted, and even the animated debates at the Ravenclaw table were winding down. Professor McGonagall stood, and the hall gradually quieted, though it took longer than it had before the feast. Everyone sluggish with good food and contentment. Before we retire for the evening, she said, I wish to remind you all that term begins tomorrow morning. Schedules will be distributed at breakfast by your heads of house. First years, please pay particular attention to the locations of your classes. The castle can be confusing, and we prefer not to lose students on their first day. A ripple of nervous laughter ran through the first-year students. To our new students especially, I say this. Hogwarts is your home now. Treat it with respect. Treat your fellow students with kindness, and treat your education with the seriousness it deserves. Magic is a gift, but it is also a responsibility. What you learn here will shape not only your own lives, but the wider wizarding world. She paused, letting this sink in. Use that knowledge wisely. Her expression softened slightly. And with that rather serious note, I bid you all good night. Prefects, please escort the first years to their dormitories. Sleep well, all of you. Tomorrow, your real education begins. the hall erupted into motion. Benches scraping, students standing, voices rising in farewells and plans for tomorrow. The prefects from each house gathered their first years like shepherds, collecting flocks, calling names, and doing head counts. Albus stood with his fellow Gryffindors, suddenly aware of how bone-deep, tired he was. The day had been impossibly long. The platform, the train, the boats, the sorting, the feast. He felt like he'd lived a week in the space of 12 hours. Rose appeared at his elbow, Dominique still with her. "This is it," she said, her voice soft with wonder. "We're really here. We're really Hogwarts students." "We really are," Albus agreed, and found himself grinning despite his exhaustion. Scorpius had emerged from the Slytherin crowd and made his way over, moving carefully through the dispersing students. "Quite a feast," he said when he reached them. "Quite an everything," Albus replied. "How's Slytherin treating you?" "Better than I expected, honestly. The prefect, his name's Marcus Flint, apparently related to the old Flint family, but not proud of it. He's been really welcoming. Made sure everyone knew that Slytherin's changed, that we're all starting fresh." Scorpius smiled slightly. "I think I'm going to be all right." "Of course you are," Rose said firmly. "We all are. Different houses, same school, same promise. Remember." "Remember," Albus and Scorpius said in unison. "First-year Gryffindors." Mara's voice carried over the noise. "Time to go. Don't make me count to 3. "That's our cue," Albus said. "See you at breakfast." "See you at breakfast," Rose and Scorpius confirmed. As Albus turned to follow Mara and the other Gryffindors, he took one last look at the Great Hall, at the floating candles beginning to dim, at the enchanted ceiling showing stars that felt close enough to touch, at the 4 house tables where students had gathered for 1,000 years to learn and grow and become something more than they'd been when they arrived. Tomorrow would bring classes and confusion, and probably a fair amount of getting lost in corridors that refused to stay in one place. But tonight, he was just Albus Potter, first-year Gryffindor, full of good food and better company, heading toward a dormitory that would be home for the next 7 years. It was enough. It was everything. The marble staircase seemed to go on forever, branching off in impossible directions, leading to corridors that Albus was certain hadn't been there a moment before. Mara Patil led the 12 first-year Gryffindors with practiced ease, pointing out landmarks as they went. "That's the entrance to the hospital wing. Try to remember it. You'll probably need it at some point. Everyone does. That corridor leads to the library. You'll spend a lot of time there. And that painting of the fruit bowl. Don't tickle the pear. Well, do tickle it if you want to visit the kitchens, but don't tell anyone I told you." "Why would we tickle a pear?" Asher asked, bewildered. "You'll find out eventually. Everyone does." Mara grinned over her shoulder. "Hogwarts is full of secrets. The trick is learning which ones are worth keeping and which ones are meant to be discovered." They climbed higher, passing students heading toward other parts of the castle. A group of Ravenclaws turned down a different corridor, their voices fading into echoes. Some Hufflepuffs descended a staircase that seemed to lead underground. Their common room was in the basement. Albus remembered his father mentioning. The staircases were as advertised. Several shifted while the Gryffindors stood on them, swinging smoothly to connect to different landings. Tobias yelped the first time it happened, nearly dropping his wand. and Mara laughed kindly. You get used to it. Sometimes you can even convince them to take you where you need to go if you ask nicely. The castle responds to respect. The castle's alive, Morgan asked, her eyes wide. In a manner of speaking, it's been soaking up magic for 1,000 years, students and professors and spells and emotions. All of that leaves an imprint. Hogwarts has a personality, in its way. Moody sometimes, but generally benevolent. Mara patted the stone wall affectionately. It takes care of its own. They passed portrait after portrait, and Albus couldn't help staring. The painted figures moved and breathed and watched the students pass with varying degrees of interest. A group of medieval monks stopped their chanting to observe the first years. A woman in Tudor-era dress waved delicately. A grumpy-looking wizard in a pointed hat muttered something about young people these days and stomped out of his frame, presumably to visit another portrait. Do they all do that? Ethan asked. Just leave their paintings? Most of them. The portraits are all connected. It's like a network. They gossip worse than anyone alive, so be careful what you say in front of them. Mara lowered her voice conspiratorially. They are also excellent sources of information if you need to find someone or learn about the castle's history. Just be prepared to hear their opinions on everything. Higher and higher they climbed, until Albus's legs began to burn and several first years were breathing heavily. The castle seemed to go on forever, tower upon tower, staircase after staircase, each level revealing new wonders. Nearly there, Mara promised. Gryffindor Tower is one of the highest points in the castle. Great views, terrible for anyone who forgets something in the Great Hall and has to go back for it. They turned down a corridor lined with armor that gleamed in the torchlight. One suit of armor raised its arm in greeting as they passed, making Asher jump and grab Arya's arm for support. That's a Cadogan, Mara explained. He's harmless, mostly. Very enthusiastic about questing and knight-errantry. Sometimes he fills in for other portraits when they go on holiday. Portraits take holidays? Tobias asked faintly. Of course, they're people, after all. Just painted people. The corridor opened into a small landing, and there, hanging on the wall in an ornate golden frame, was a portrait of a very fat lady in a pink silk dress. She'd been dozing, apparently, because she started awake as they approached, her hand flying to her chest. Goodness, you startled me. She adjusted her dress and peered down at them with interest. Oh, first years, how delightful. Let me look at you properly. She examined each of them in turn, her expression warm and welcoming. When her eyes landed on Albus, she gasped softly. Another Potter. Oh, my dear, you look just like your father. Same eyes, same worried expression he had on his first night. Your brother has been through here already, of course, but there's always room for more Potters in Gryffindor. Albus felt his cheeks heat, but managed a smile. Thank you, Mom. Such manners. Your grandmother raised your father well. I see she did the same for you. The fat lady beamed at him, then addressed the group. I am the guardian of Gryffindor Tower. No one enters without the password. No exceptions, no matter how clever you think your excuse is. The password changes regularly, so pay attention when it's announced. Tonight's password is Fortitudo, which is Latin for courage. Rather appropriate for your first night, I think. Fortitudo, Mara said clearly, and the portrait swung forward like a door, revealing a round hole in the wall. Welcome home, the fat lady said softly. In you go, dears. They climbed through the portrait hole one by one. It was a bit of an awkward scramble, especially for the shorter students, and emerged into the Gryffindor common room. Albus stopped in his tracks, unable to help himself. The room was everything he'd imagined and more. Circular and cozy, with the warm, lived-in feeling of a place that had been loved for centuries. The walls were lined with comfortable, squashy armchairs and worn sofas in shades of scarlet and gold. A large fireplace dominated one wall, flames crackling merrily despite the relatively warm September evening. Above it hung a portrait of a lion, which winked at them as they entered. Windows looked out over the dark grounds, and through them Albus could see the stars and the dark shape of the forbidden forest in the distance. The Quidditch pitch was just visible, and beyond that, the black lake gleamed in the moonlight. "Blimey," Ethan breathed, and several first years nodded in agreement. The room was scattered with evidence of student life. Books piled on tables, half-finished homework abandoned when dinner was called, a wizard chess set with pieces that appeared to be arguing with each other. Notice boards on the walls displayed everything from Quidditch practice schedules to advertisements for various clubs to warnings about banned pranks. But what struck Albus most was the warmth. The common room felt alive, welcoming, safe. The fire cast dancing shadows across the walls. The furniture practically begged to be sunk into. The very air seemed to hum with the presence of all the Gryffindors who'd passed through this room. His father, his grandparents, his aunts and uncles, centuries of students who'd called this place home. A few older students had lingered, clearly waiting to welcome the first years. James bounded over immediately, his face alight with enthusiasm. "Brilliant, isn't it? Wait until you see the view from the dormitories. You can see all the way to Hogsmeade on clear days." He grabbed Albus by the shoulders. "You're really here, Al. You're actually a Gryffindor." "I'm really here," Albus agreed, and felt the truth of it settle in his chest. Mara clapped her hands to get everyone's attention. "Right, listen up. Boys' dormitories are up that staircase." She pointed to a spiral stair on the left. "Girls are up that one. You're in the first-year rooms, which are the first doors you'll come to. Your trunks have already been brought up, and your beds are labelled. The common room is for everyone, but the dormitories are enchanted. Boys can't enter the girls' stairs, and vice versa. Yes, people have tried. No, it doesn't work. Don't bother." "What happens if you try?" Morgan asked. "The stairs turn into a slide and deposit you rather unceremoniously back in the common room. It's embarrassing for everyone involved." Mara smiled. "Any other questions?" "What time is breakfast?" Tobias asked, ever practical. "Starts at 7:30, but the Great Hall is open until 9. You'll find it easier to navigate in daylight, at least at first. The portraits are friendlier in the morning too, more willing to give directions." Mara looked around at all of them, her expression softening. "I know today has been overwhelming. I know you're exhausted and probably a bit scared, and definitely not sure you remember how to get back to the Great Hall. That's all normal. Give it time. This place becomes home before you realize it's happening." "Thank you," Asher said quietly, and several others murmured agreement. "That's what prefects are for. Now, off to bed with you. Tomorrow's going to be a long day. All first days are." The boys climbed the spiral staircase, their footsteps echoing in the narrow space. The stairs wound up, and Albus counted 5 doors before they reached the one marked first years. Tobias pushed it open, and they filed into their new home. The dormitory was perfect. 5 4-poster beds hung with deep crimson velvet curtains were spaced around the circular room, each with a trunk at its foot and a small bedside table. Tall windows looked out over the grounds, currently showing nothing but darkness and stars. A small fireplace provided additional warmth, and someone, house elves presumably, had laid out pajamas on each bed. Albus found his trunk easily. His name was on a small brass plate on the bedside table. His bed was between Tobias's and Ethan's, with Morgan pre-wed. Wait, Morgan was a girl's name. Albus looked around, confused, then realized that Morgan wasn't there. Right, obviously. The girls were in their own dormitory. The 5 boys in the room were Albus, Tobias, Ethan, a quiet boy named Simon Kirk, who Albus remembered being sorted early, and another named Aidan Thomas, who... No, wait. Aidan Thomas had been sorted into Slytherin. Albus was more tired than he'd realized. He looked around again and spotted the 5th boy, who'd been sitting quietly on his bed this whole time. Dark hair, serious expression, expensive looking, pajamas already on. "I'm Cassius Greengrass," the boy said, his voice very proper. "My mother was in Slytherin, but I'm apparently destined for Gryffindor. Quite the family scandal." "Albus Potter," Albus replied automatically. "My family's all Gryffindor, so I suppose I'm meeting expectations rather than defying them." "Lucky you." But Cassius smiled slightly, taking the edge off the words. The boys began preparing for bed with the awkward self-consciousness of people who'd never shared sleeping quarters before. Albus changed into his pajamas quickly, grateful for the curtains that could provide privacy if needed. His trunk, when he opened it, was full of familiar things: his clothes, his books, a photograph of his family that his mother had insisted he pack, even though he'd protested he wouldn't need it. Looking at it now, his parents smiling, James making faces, Lily laughing, he was glad she'd insisted. "Is that your family?" Tobias asked, peering over. "Your dad really does look just like you. Or you look like him, I suppose." "Yeah, people mention it. A lot." Albus set the photo on his bedside table where he could see it. Ethan was examining his bed with great interest. "These mattresses are incredible. It's like sleeping on a cloud. A very firm, supportive cloud." "House elves," Cassius said knowingly. "They maintain everything in the castle. My aunt says they take pride in making the beds perfect." "My aunt says we should free them all," Tobias said, then looked uncertain. "Though I'm not sure how the beds would get made if we did." "The house elves don't want to be freed." Simon spoke up for the first time, his voice quiet. "At least, that's what I've read. They like serving. It makes them happy. Freedom would actually make most of them miserable." "That's what my dad says," Albus offered, though Aunt Hermione argues with him about it constantly. Something about how wanting to serve doesn't make servitude right, even if they're magically compelled to enjoy it. "Heavy topics for bedtime," Ethan observed, flopping onto his bed. "Can we just appreciate that we're sleeping in Hogwarts Castle and discuss house elf ethics tomorrow?" "Fair point," Tobias agreed, climbing into his own bed. "Though I'm not sure I'll be able to sleep. Too excited." But even as he said it, his eyes were drooping. The combination of the long day, the heavy meal, and the extremely comfortable bed was working its magic on all of them. Albus slid under his covers. Silk sheets, he realized, with surprise, or something equally smooth, and stared up at the canopy above him. Through the gap in his bed curtains, he could see the window and the stars beyond. "We're really here," Ethan said into the darkness. "At Hogwarts, learning magic. This is mental." "Completely mad," Tobias agreed sleepily. "Worth it, though," Simon added. "Definitely worth it," Albus murmured. The room fell quiet, filled only with the crackle of the fire and the soft sounds of 5 boys settling into sleep. Albus closed his eyes, exhaustion finally overwhelming everything else. His last thought before sleep claimed him was that he'd made it. Through the barrier, through the journey, through the sorting, through his first evening as a Hogwarts student. Tomorrow would bring classes and challenges and probably getting lost multiple times. But tonight, he was safe in Gryffindor Tower, surrounded by new friends, part of something ancient and magical and wonderful. Outside, the castle settled into its nighttime rhythms. The staircases rearranged themselves for the evening configuration. The portraits gossiped about the new students. The ghosts drifted through their eternal rounds. The house elves worked their invisible magic, ensuring everything was ready for tomorrow. And in 4 different towers, in 4 different common rooms, first-year students were falling asleep for the first time as Hogwarts students, their futures unwritten, their potential unlimited, their choices entirely their own. The enchanted ceiling in the Great Hall showed stars wheeling in their ancient patterns, the same stars that had watched over 1,000 years of students and would watch over 1,000 more. In Gryffindor Tower, Albus Severus Potter, neither his father's shadow nor his namesake's echo, but himself entirely and completely, drifted into dreams of flying and friendship and magic yet to be learned. Tomorrow, his real journey would begin. Tonight, he was home. The stars wheeled on, eternal and unchanging, and Hogwarts kept its silent watch, as it had for 1,000 years, as it would for 1,000 more. The beginning was complete. The story had truly begun. And somewhere in the castle, in a room that appeared only when needed, a mirror that showed the heart's deepest desire reflected nothing at all, waiting patiently for the next student who would stand before it and see not what they lacked, but who they might become. Magic hummed in the stones, in the air, in the very foundation of Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry. And 3 friends, one in Gryffindor Tower, one in Ravenclaw Tower, one in the Slytherin dungeons, slept peacefully, connected by promises made and friendship offered, ready to face whatever their 7 years would bring. Together, the castle's many clocks chimed midnight, their bells echoing through corridors and classrooms, through dormitories and dungeons, marking the passage from one day to the next. September 2nd had arrived, the first day of classes, the first day of the rest of their lives. But that, as they say, is another story. For now, there was only peace and starlight, and the gentle crackling of fires keeping young witches and wizards warm through their first night at home. At Hogwarts, where the magic never ends, and every day brings new wonders, where friendships are forged that last lifetimes, where children become witches and wizards, where stories begin that will echo through the ages. Home at last,